A warm welcome to today's video explaining the criticisms of the teleological argument for philosophy A-level. Now, the previous video that discussed the arguments themselves, and today I'll break down the 4 key criticisms that you need to understand to get the top marks in philosophy A-level. Now, the first group of criticisms are from David Hume. Now, Hume's first point is very simple. He criticises the analogy between a machine and the universe. This is quite an intuitive point. Clearly, the universe is very different to an engine, for example. And Hume's point here is, in fact, he has multiple points. But the first point is, look at the engine. So the engine has a history that dates back hundreds of years. There are literally hundreds of designers of different parts of the engine that gets us to the V12 engine that's used in a Ferrari, for example. I'm not a car guy, but even I know that over hundreds of years, from Newcomb and Watt, who developed the first steam engine, to now, hundreds of years and hundreds of different people have been responsible for fine-tuning the machine. And that's clearly a difference to the universe. The universe, we don't suppose, has multiple designers, multiple deities. In the same way that we wouldn't expect that the universe has multiple copies of it. We don't expect that the universe is mass-produced in the same way that the steam engine was, for example. And so, see, this is a really simple way of criticising the analogy, but it is an effective one. A good analogy takes lots of similarities that we accept, that we know, and then adds one more on top of that we may not expect. So we both understand that the iPhone and the iPad have many similarities. They use the same charging cable, they have the same operating system. If I then stretch that to the manufacturer of those goods is by Apple, you can follow that analogy. But what Hume is doing is Hume is saying, well, actually, no, the engine, a complex machine, and the universe are completely different. And so we don't have the grounds to bridge this to they're both caused by an intelligent mind. That's the first Hume criticism. The next Hume criticism is the idea of spatial disorder. And if you know it, using the problem of evil and suffering here is a really good place to go to. So the idea of disorder is very simple. If I was to build an engine, for example, I'm not a mechanical engineer, and so the engine that I would build would probably be terrible. It probably wouldn't work very well. It would be inefficient. There would be lots of issues with it. And so what you would conclude is that the designer of my engine is incompetent, and you'd be right in this case. But when we look at the world, when we see evil in the world, when we see just random, pointless things in the world, mosquitoes, for example, no one likes those. When we look at that, we see elements of disorder, elements of randomness, elements of chaos. And if we saw that for a complex machine, well, we would assume that the designer is incompetent. And so when we look at the disorderly world in space, we see, and we must assume, that the designer is incompetent, or at least not perfect. Now, there are lots of good in the world as well, so we're not going to assume that the designer is some just stupid idiot. You know, there's loads of great stuff, beautiful, awe-inspiring things in the universe as well, but there is a lot of wasted stuff, wasted space as well. And so that's a problem here levelled by Hume toward his and consequent teleological arguments. Now, Paley was writing before the work of Hume, and so Paley didn't know about the criticism that Hume was going to write in the future, of course, but Paley did anticipate this sort of attack. What Paley argues is that the product, so the universe, does not need to be perfect in order for us to infer the designer was the cause. So the watch that I find in a field may not be working, but that doesn't prevent me from thinking that there must be a watchmaker. Now that seems strong initially, but I don't think this holds up because, okay, for a watch, for an engine, this may hold up, but the problem is the universe was caused by a perfect being. And so a perfect being, by definition, can't make mistakes. And so although Paley's defence may work against the watch, personally, I don't think it holds up against spatial disorder in the universe, because the universe has to be perfect, and it isn't. So those two criticisms are from Hume. The final one is a sort of a more broad point that we can use both of these together. It is that the universe is a unique case. If I was suddenly to see lightning strike, and I was the first ever human to see that happen, what I would assume is, well, I don't know what I would assume. I would make some random guess, and it would probably be wrong. I might think that it's a god that's being angry or something. You know, we're being punished by the gods. The reason why my reasoning is poor here is because I've only seen it once. It's a unique case. And so any logic that I have from that isn't going to be very strong at all. What we need is multiple instances of an event to form any strong reasons for why this is the case. Because we only have a sample size of one for the universe, we can't make any strong assumptions. And so those are the three key David Hume criticisms. The next ones are from Immanuel Kant. You need to understand them thoroughly because these are probably going to be where you go to in the final few paragraphs of your essays. The reason is they criticise Paley and they criticise Swinburne's argument, which in my opinion is stronger than Paley's. So these are really important ones to understand. The first thing you need to understand is that Kant accepts the analogy between watches, products of human design, and the universe. But what he rejects is that the premises lead through to the conclusion that God is the creator of the universe. All that the conclusion merits is that the cause of the natural world is a worldly architect. And so that's how you can remember this argument. It's sort of a worldly architect argument. Catchy. So the watchmaker is brilliant and has dedicated their whole life to their craft. But what they didn't do was they didn't create the glass and create the metals that is used to make the watch. They didn't create the diamonds either, depending on how nice the watch is, of course. So all that we can say is that the watchmaker put all the pieces together. And that's all that we can suggest, all that we can conclude, rather, about God. God put all the things together in a really awe-inspiring way, but God didn't create the building blocks of the universe itself. In the same way that the architect didn't create the materials, they just designed it and put it together. Or maybe got engineers and things to put it together. So that's the worldly architect argument from Kant. It's very simple. He does accept the analogy, but he just doesn't accept that that will lead to the conclusion that God created the universe, merely that God was the architect of the universe. And then following this, the teleological argument also cannot show that the creator has any divine qualities, because there's nothing in the premises that show that God is perfect. In fact, as Hume argues, it could actually be the opposite. Because of the disorder, we can actually show that we can more successfully, more clearly show that God is an incompetent worldly architect than an all-perfect worldly architect. And so we can attack the definition of God using Kant's criticisms, as well as attacking the teleological argument itself. So for Kant, you cannot move from evidence in the world to the conclusion that God is perfect, or to the conclusion that God created all of the building blocks, if you like, of the universe. Those are the criticisms of the teleological argument. Finally, a note on additional resources. In the description of this video, you will find a list of free resources to learn more, to do further reading on if you would like to. There's also access to a Google document with practice questions. So if you made it this far into the video, you're clearly motivated to get the top marks. If you are, use those practice questions, test the knowledge that you have learned or recapped in this video, and improve your technique along the way. I hope this video has been helpful. Thank you for watching.